collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, the EU's plan to tackle the refugee crisis.
The European Commission has made bold proposals, realistic proposals, in order to be able to help alleviate the problem in those countries which are what we call the frontline countries.
We'll hear about the positive contribution that migrants can make to their host communities.
How can we inform member states and other countries to create the institutions and the capacity to try to manage migration in a better way?
Learn about Edgar Chahine, a 20th century engraver whose work is on display in Nicosia.
He was very successful. He even illustrated books by Anatole France, Paul Verlaine, Colette, famous writers of the time.
And prepare for the festive season with A Christmas Carol.
I think it's a very relevant message. I think it's a beautiful message of the transformation of Scrooge from a grumpy old man who did not believe in Christmas and who ends up believing in Christmas and actually wishing everybody a very Merry Christmas.
The refugee or migrant crisis in the European Union rumbles on. At the end of October, there was a meeting held in Brussels with President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, convening the leaders of the countries concerned and most affected by the emergency situation along the Western Balkans route. They came up with a 17-point plan of pragmatic and operational measures they said should ensure that people aren't left to fend for themselves in the rain and the cold. Joining us on the programme this week is the head of the EU Commission representation in Cyprus, George Markopouliodis. George, what was the basis of this 17-point plan?
Rosie, the point is that, as President Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the Commission, said that countries affected, they need not only talk about and talk at each other, but they basically need to talk with each other. We all see on our televisions that we're talking about a problem which is a European problem, and it cannot be solved by individual action, by a single country.
Well, that came to light when some of the countries sort of broke ranks and said, we don't want them here, didn't it? That has been turned around by the majority ruling, but is it going to be implemented in the countries that really are being forced to do something they don't want to do?
Well, yes, because there are rules, and when people agree to something, they're bound by this agreement, and they will have to implement it. One of the reasons why President Juncker convened that meeting, which incidentally gathered in the Bellemont headquarters of the European Commission, it was an informal meeting. The leaders from Albania, Austria, Bulgaria, Croatia, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Romania, Serbia and Slovenia, was basically to deal with the Western Balkans migration route. And they agreed, they came out, as you said correctly, with a 17-point action plan. I will not go through every single detail, but basically the key points of the agreement is to have a much reinforced exchange of information. This is why he said we need to talk to each other, so that we have in real time, through the nomination of contact points in each country, we have in real time a clear idea of how many people are coming in, and etc. There was a commitment by Greece to increase reception capacity for people who are in need of international protection by 30,000 places in the first instance, and also another 20,000, so a total of about 50,000 later on next year.
But then we have to point out there, George, that that's about a week's worth of the number of people arriving every day on the Greek islands. Yes. So this isn't going to solve the problem. It's almost like a sticking plaster over a deep wound.
It is an issue. The migration flows are not going to stop. And both President Juncker and Vice President Mr. Timmermans and Mr. Avramopoulos have said on several occasions this is not going to stop tomorrow, and we know that. However, the European Commission has made bold proposals, realistic proposals, in order to be able to help alleviate the problem in those countries which are what we call the frontline countries, like, for example, Italy, but in particular Greece. And this is why we proposed, and this has been agreed by the European Council, by the heads of state and government, that there's going to be a relocation, as we call it, scheme, through which people who are in Greece at the moment are going to be relocated in other European countries.
How are they going to be relocated? At the moment, they're bused to the border at Idomeni and they walk across, which again, with winter coming, is not an ideal situation. We've seen so many deaths in the sea. There will be more on land of the frail, the elderly and the very young as winter draws on. Are there going to be more concrete measures in terms of providing transport, perhaps allocating people where they're going as they cross the border and taking them there?
Well, the idea is that there are several countries that have already committed to take a certain number of people, including Cyprus, a small number, I must say. These pledges have been made on the basis of a distribution key, if I can use that word, of people in need of international protection, which is relative to their size and their capacity to be able to deal with this huge number of refugees coming in. But the idea also, and this is important, that was agreed at that meeting in October, was that there's going to be an effort to manage the migration flows together. That is to say, to have capacity, to provide the capacity to do all the registering that needs to be done, because they need to register. Exchange the information, as I said before, very quickly and efficiently, and also to have actions to have a better border management, including, for example, as you mentioned before, in Greece, strengthening border cooperation of Greece and the neighbouring countries.
If they've registered in Greece, which they have, to be moved to the mainland, do they have to register again at every country they go to?
No,
Wouldn't it be much easier for Greece just to say, OK, these 500 people are registered, these are their details, exchange the details with whichever should be the reception country, and send them there directly?
Yeah, this is the idea. This is the idea that they will not be obliged to register on several occasions. They will register once, and basically this is terribly important in order to ascertain that they are indeed in need of international protection. And I think one of the key points is that the refugees, they will have to cooperate with this procedure, which is a necessary step for them to be able to have the possibility either to stay in Greece or to be relocated in other countries.
Now that brings up the nationality of different refugees, because Syrians are being given, I think, a priority, but then you get Afghan refugees who've also escaped from the Taliban and from what's going on in Afghanistan, and are they going to be sent home?
Well, that I don't know the exact position on the Afghans, but the majority of the refugees, as you said yourself, were from Syria, and we see that. There have been a number of refugees from Eritrea, which is being plagued by terrible war, and also from Libya, and these are the categories of the first refugees which were going to be relocated in other European countries. What we have also proposed is the question of resettlement. I'm sorry about the technical terms, but I mean resettlement basically are people in need of international protection who are outside of the territory of the EU, in third countries, and we have proposed that a number of these people should be able to, after registration, to be able to enter the EU. We had proposed 20,000, and already that has been agreed at the level of the Council. I think the number that has been agreed is even slightly greater, is 22,000. So these people will be registered, and they will have the necessary documentation to be settled in European countries.
All right, there's a big problem in Turkey, of course, because they've got over 2 million refugees there, I think.
2.2 million.
And
from Syria only.
There was a move recently by the European Union to offer funding to try and keep them there, and then of course there's the problem of the smugglers. So how is the Commission, if you like, going in on the ground even before they get to Greece to try and prevent what's happening rather than deal with it after it's happened?
Yes, on your first point on Turkey, it's quite clear that we need to reinforce our cooperation with Turkey on this issue. There has been a discussion on an EU-Turkey action plan, which has been agreed. Its basic parameters, needs finalization and implementation, of course. On the funding, because there has been quite a lot of discussion, there is no exact figure that has been decided, but there are discussions on an order of magnitude, and I think the figure that had been discussed was of the order of 3 billion euros.
Which would be used for what?
Which would be used to reinforce the capacity for Turkey to be able to deal with this very large number of refugees, thus taking away, if you want, the necessity or the incentive for these people, to cross over.
So to improve conditions for them in Turkey?
To improve conditions, which are not conditions are very reasonable. But I mean, Turkey, whether we want it or not, does have a very high cost for 2.2 million people, are quite a lot of people. But since we're talking about the money, I must say that sometimes we hear Europe isn't doing anything. I think it is quite clear we can do more, in the sense that and President Juncker has said everybody, meaning member states, have to take on the responsibility and deliver on the various pledges that we have made, including also on the financial aspects. There's quite a lot of money which will be spent over the next few years, a couple of years, of the order of over 9 billion euros, if you take into account all the money that is going to deal with the migration issue. And all this money is also external assistance money, which will go to tackle the root causes of the...
What about the smugglers?
And the smugglers is a real issue, and this is why one of the measures that are in this 17-point plan is to step up actions by the three main agencies or bodies that can deal with these issues, which is Europol, which is Frontex, the border management agency, and Interpol. And there have been pledges for the deployment of additional officers, police officers, and the essential equipment in a very, very short space of time. And also there are efforts in order to be able to hit those smugglers and traffickers of human beings, which is a hideous crime, there where it hurts the most, which is basically the money.
Which brings us back to the suggestion that's been made many times over the past 3 or 4 months, that it would actually probably be more sensible for Europe to find a legal way for people who are in need of protection to enter the European Union. That would pull the rug right out from under the smugglers, and it would be much more orderly for the people arriving in the European Union.
Well, this is possibly so, but I mean, these people are very desperate, and they get exploited by the smugglers and the traffickers, so they find this, unfortunately, an easier way than other ways, which also have, as you know, legal problems. It's not so easy for people from third countries to enter the EU. One of the ways that also the European Union is trying to deal with this is to have the examination of the papers of people who are going to be resettled in EU territory already in hotspots, which are in the third country concerned. I mean, we have hotspots, and we're creating hotspots in Greece, as you know, and other areas. But one of the ideas is that Commission delegations can help in assisting the authorities of the third countries to be able to establish whether really a person is in need of a...
So if they do that in Turkey, then people can legally enter the EU and don't have to go on those boats?
Yes, which is one of the issues why we are talking to Turkey and why we need to reinforce our cooperation on these issues.
I know that they said at the meeting they would meet on a regular basis to assess what was happening. Do you think that the 17-point plan will work, or presumably they're going to have to fine-tune it as they see what is missing?
Well, I think it will work. I mean, it's already a very positive step, I think, and we in the Commission and President Juncker himself, he has shown the commitment, unwavering commitment, I would say, with which he's dealing with this issue, because we came out already 5 months ago when the problem was obviously much bigger than people were thinking, with proposals and insistence and encouragement to the various governments, because at the end of the day, governments have to play the game. It is not the European Commission that is managing this. It will be member states that have agreed on our proposals and will implement all this. I think the plan will work. I think it is obviously valid, as you say, that it might need some fine-tuning. We will have to see how it goes. But what is essential is that this initial size of the problem gets alleviated for the refugees themselves, because we're talking about the refugees, and we're talking about human beings, as I say, like you and me, whose only misfortune was that they were born in countries which are ridden with wars and conflict.
Which brings us to the Vienna meetings and the attempts by not just the European Union but other governments as well. Russia was there, Iran was there for a change, and the US, to try and find some sort of political solution. Because actually, unless that occurs, then the flow of refugees is not going to go away. What about that?
Yes, I think that, there's very little I can add to what you have already said. I mean, I think it's absolutely correct that unless we find a solution to the problems and end the conflict, then it's going to be extremely difficult to stop the flow of refugees. For Syria, our position is clear. We want to have a solution to the benefit of the Syrian people, with the participation of the Syrian people. And there is very, very heavy diplomatic activity which is going on there in order to achieve that. That's
Which didn't, though, include many of the warring factions in Syria. Do you think it's possible for external governments to impose a solution?
No, I don't think that. I can speak on behalf of the European Commission on this one. I mean, our view has always been that we don't want to impose anything, and precisely this is why we're saying that it has to be a democratic solution to the benefit of all Syrian people. But I mean, Syria is not the only place. As I mentioned before, we have issues in Africa. You know, I think we have already said it in previous discussions we had, Rosie, that the EU, and not many people know that, is the biggest donor of development assistance in the world. We spend, member states, Europe spends more than 55 billion, if my memory doesn't fail me, 55 billion euros a year on this. We're the biggest donor. However, what is being proposed, and has been proposed by President Juncker and the Commission, is that we create a specific fund of about 1.8 billion euros for Africa. And this is where they're going to meet to discuss, first of all, the constitution of this fund, and secondly, its main objectives and priorities and ways of operating, under the assumption that this fund will be used to stem the primary causes of all this, which basically is the need to have the biggest amount of development in these countries, so that the people who become refugees do not need to become refugees anymore. We'll see how this will go, but I think the issue is that you need a palette of armory, if I can use that word, in order to deal with this issue, which primarily means that you have to stop the conflicts, you have to raise the level of economic and social development in these countries, so that these people do not have the necessity, to leave their countries with their kids and take treacherous and sometimes, unfortunately, as we see on our television screens on a daily basis, deadly routes in order to reach Europe.
And that is George Markopouliotis talking about the meeting on the Western Balkans migration route after EU leaders agreed on a 17-point plan of action at the end of October.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Laura Thompson is Deputy Director General of the International Organization for Migration, or IOM. She was in Nicosia earlier this week to give a lecture on migration and development perspectives to the Mediterranean crisis. She laid great emphasis in her speech on the opportunities that migration can offer to host countries, and I asked her afterwards how she could get this message across.
Well, I think, first of all, what we need is to pass the message of the large contribution that migration has had in the development of societies before. And we have been relatively bad at doing that, in the sense that we have very much been capable of passing around the argument of the protection of human rights, of labor rights of migrants, and the importance of doing things like that. But we have been relatively bad at making the economic argument about migration, how much migration collaborates in innovation, how much migration collaborates in trade links, in transfer of skills, how much migration collaborates in culture, in enriching the cultural societies, how much migration brings and takes very good elements of our culture, of our economy, of our knowledge, cultural knowledge and actual knowledge, and how much migration makes that knowledge to circulate around.
It does seem that Angela Merkel in Germany has understood this, because her open doors policy initially, a lot of people said, well, she's looking to the future because they need the workers. So it's a little strange that with the economic situation across the European Union, and particularly in a place like Cyprus, we haven't actually thought about this aspect of migration.
Well, it's not that we have not thought about it. It is just that it's a complex issue. In order to look at the economic, cultural, societal contributions of migration, you have to have multidisciplinary teams that are looking at migration in the broader picture of migration. You have to bring together entities, a large number of entities within a government, and do transversal basically analysis of what migration brings. So if you don't have the ministers of labor, the ministers of planning, the ministers of health, the minister of education, obviously interior,
then it's not going to work. I know you have to go. Let me just ask you very quickly, you're hoping to put all of this into a plan that your organisation is putting together, I think, at a meeting in Malta.
We have made a series of recommendations for the meeting in Malta, but those are directly related to responding to the specific situation that we are seeing at the Mediterranean today. What we are doing separately is a whole analysis within the organization of what do we mean by good migration management, and how can we inform member states and other countries to create the institutions and the capacity to try to manage migration in a better way, in a comprehensive and holistic way, again, that takes not only the challenges that migration brings, but also the opportunities that migration opens.
The Deputy Director General of the International Organization for Migration, Laura Thompson.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Last Friday at the CVAR in Old Nicosia, an exhibition opened of etchings by Edgar Chahine. Who was he? Why are we seeing them in Cyprus? With me on the programme this week is the gentleman who gave the collection to be shown through until the 17th of the month. He is Ruben Nahabedian, and he joins us now. Ruben, who actually was Edgar Chahine?
Well, he was a French-Armenian etcher of Armenian origin. He was born in Vienna, but lived most of his life, well, the early part of his life in Constantinople. His father there was a director at the Ottoman Bank, and around 1892 the father felt something bad was coming up in Turkey, and he sent his wife and his son to Venice, where he went to the Murad Rafaelian school, the Armenian school there run by the Catholic Armenians, where he studied for 3 years. When he finished schooling, he went to the Venice art school. He spent a year there. And in 1895, they moved to Paris from Venice.
By which time had he become an etcher, or was he still somebody fresh out of art school with the possibility of doing painting or many other things?
Well, at the beginning, he was only doing oils and pastels. And it was not until 1899 when he was persuaded by Sago, who was his publisher, to start etching.
And how do you describe etching to people who don't understand the methodology, if you like?
Well, there are a few different ways of engraving. Normally it's done on metal, where with a needle you engrave the design onto a metal, and then you print it onto paper.
And that's the method that he used, because as you said, there are many different methods.
Well, yes. I mean, he used different techniques like soft ground etching, hard ground etching, aqua tint. There are different methods, and he used them all. And in some of the etchings, you can see that he has used all three techniques.
And you can see a progression as well, I think, in some of his etchings. I mean, how would you describe the way his art progressed through his life?
Well, in the beginning, when they first went to Paris, they lived in the 15th arrondissement of Paris, which was a very poor district, full of unemployed people, old people, beggars, and things like that. So he considered himself as a painter of the street. And he said this was the La Vie Lamentable, which is the miserable life. And he painted beggars, he painted unemployed people walking in the streets. And it was not until later, towards 1900, when his publisher made him become interested more in the sort of gay Parisian life, when he started painting, not painting, but engraving dancers, prostitutes, people like that. And of course, 1900 was a very elegant period at the time. You know, the dresses were beautiful, women wore beautiful hats. So it was, you know, a very exciting period.
And was he successful during his lifetime?
He was very successful in the beginning. Very, very, until the 1930s when he started losing his eyesight and he couldn't engrave anymore and he turned back to oils and pastels. He was very successful. He even illustrated books by Anatole France, Paul Verlaine, Colette, you know, famous writers of the time.
And then what? Once he got older, did he live a happy retirement?
Well, the war came, and of course he didn't have much to do during the war. After the war, there was the etching revival, of course. But then the Great Depression came in the 30s, so that sort of put a damper on things. But until about 1936, he was very successful. It was only later that when lithography came into use and all that sort of thing, he didn't like doing work in color. He liked black and white.
And sepia as well. A lot of the pictures that you've got in the exhibition are sort of those sepia tones, as it were.
That's right. He worked with browns and blacks, and he only did some color etchings which were done in the poupée style, which meant, you know, you dip your cotton wool in paint of a different color and dab it onto the etching.
How did you come to have so many of his pictures? And do you know how, I mean, he must have done many, many more in his time, but there are how many in this exhibition?
There are 56 in the exhibition. He has done a total of about 450. How I came about it was in 1954. My parents were in France on holiday, and my mother was walking past the gallery in Paris, and he saw the name Chahine in the window. And she thought, you know, it sounded very Armenian, so she walked in, and she saw these etchings, and she was really impressed by that all. And she came across a little etching of Armenian orphans, 3 little children, which also is a theme of the exhibition. And these were orphans from the Adana massacres of 1909. And as she was born in Adana, she thought, you know, this resonated something. And she bought that with another one. And this is how the whole collection started.
And she carried on buying them as she found them.
She carried on buying them, and after she died, of course, I inherited the collection, and I, you know, kept adding to it.
Well, it is a fabulous collection, and as we said, it opened last Friday at the CVAR, and it runs through until
the 17th of November.
So pop down to the CVAR. It is a fabulous exhibition. It's the work of Edgar Chahine. Well, it's pantomime time again, but not quite pantomime by the Anglo-Cypriot Theatre this year. They're calling it a Christmas show. That's because it is A Christmas Carol, the famous story by Dickens, and it's being directed by Lila Said. Lila, how do you turn Dickens' Christmas Carol into something that we call a Christmas show, but it isn't a pantomime, is it?
No, it is not a pantomime. It isn't audience participation. It isn't a lot of dancing and choruses and a dame and and cross-dressing. No, we're very faithful to the message. We're very faithful to Dickens and the language. And the reason we say not appropriate for under 8 years old is because the humor is mainly in the language and the text. The twist and making it a Christmas show is that I have 9 actors, 6 adults, 2 young people, and 1 child doing the 31 parts. And they also serve as the spirits as well as furniture pieces. So that's the twist.
So how do you think this will go down in place of the Christmas pantomime, which has become very much part of the festive season in Nicosia, with particularly tiny kids missing out this year on their Christmas theatre?
Well, little kids meaning under age 8. There is so much else happening in Nicosia. Peter Pan was just on, I think this is on this weekend, and a lot of other festivities are there for children under the age of 8. This is a family show, ages 8 to 80, 80 plus, whatever. I think that it launches the Christmas season. I think it's a very relevant message. I think it's a beautiful message of the transformation of Scrooge from a grumpy old man who did not believe in Christmas and who ends up believing in Christmas and actually wishing everybody a very Merry Christmas.
So you're obviously getting that message across. How have you gone about in terms of the direction? Is this very much in the Dickens Victorian period, or are you going to bring something else to it?
Well, we're not doing costumes per se, because the actors do multiple parts, so there is no way they can keep changing costumes, etc., and still stay within a time element. So we are relying on costume pieces and props, hats and shawls and caps and scarves and mufflers and other hand props to change from one character to the other. And the actors do that in full view of the audience most of the time, and they change the physicality and the vocal quality to suit the character.
It sounds like it's a pretty tall order, shall we say, for amateur actors. How are they coping?
Well, I believe that professional is in the attitude that you have towards the job. And I believe that every single member of my cast and creative crew are professionals in the real sense of the word. It's not a syndicate card that makes you professional. It's the dedication and the enjoyment and the passion that you have for the theatre that makes you a pro. And I've worked with professionals, I've worked with amateurs, I've worked with young people, and I have an amazing cast that is definitely fulfilling that tall order.
So when and where is this going to be performed?
It will be performed at Satirico in the small auditorium upstairs, not the large auditorium, and it will be the last weekend in November, Saturday and Sunday, the 28th and 29th. 2 performances on the Saturday at 3 p.m. and at 7:30, 1 performance on Sunday at 3, and the following weekend, December 5 and 6, same time, 3 and 7:30 on Saturday and 3 on Sunday.
Tickets will be on sale from November the 16th at St Paul's Parish Office between 4 and 6 p.m. on weekdays, or you can call 99 92 4363. Adults €12, children €6. That's the ACT Christmas show, A Christmas Carol. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.